In the early morning hours of May 29, 1914, the RMS Empress of Ireland was en route from Quebec to Liverpool when she was struck by a Norwegian cargo ship called the Storstad. The Storstad, which was carrying more than 10,000 tons of coal, sliced through the hull of the Empress with devastating consequences. As the cargo ship pulled away from the Empress, more than 60,000 gallons of water began pouring into the doomed liner every second. In just 14 minutes, the Empress capsized and sank, killing 1,012 people, many of them entombed in her hull at the bottom of the St. Lawrence River. It remains the worst peacetime disaster in Canadian history. Despite the huge loss of life, the tragedy was quickly overshadowed by the onset of World War I just 2 months later. Today, we explore the life and death of the Empress of Ireland and the legacy of this often overlooked piece of history. Construction on the Empress of Ireland began in Glasgow, Scotland in 1905. She was the second of 2 ships ordered by the Canadian Pacific Steamship Company as a result of Canada's expansion into the lucrative transatlantic market the previous year. While shipping companies like the Cunard and White Star Lines competed for passengers with large and luxurious ocean liners like the Lusitania and the Titanic, the Canadian Pacific Line produced ships with efficiency in mind. At 570 feet, or 170 meters, and just a little more than 14,000 tons, the Empress of Ireland and her identical sister ship, the Empress of Britain, were not made to cater to the rich and famous. They were, however, a reliable and affordable way for tens of thousands of immigrants to cross the Atlantic in just a few days. Author and scholar James Kroll says, "The Empress never aspired to the standards of ostentatious luxury that were the mark of the gigantic superships competing for the rich New York market, but they did establish an unchallenged reputation for something that early 20th century travelers understood and appreciated, namely solid comfort." On June 29, 1906, the Empress of Ireland set out on her maiden voyage. In 1909, the Empress tore a hole in her hull after striking a sunken wreck in the St. Lawrence River, an eerie incident that one might say foreshadowed the Empress's fate 5 years later. In 1912, in response to the Titanic disaster, the Empress's wooden lifeboats were replaced with 16 steel lifeboats and 26 collapsible lifeboats. Combined, they could carry nearly 300 more people than the ship was licensed to carry. No amount of safety equipment, however, could have prepared the passengers and crew for the horrifying events of May 29, 1914. The Empress of Ireland began her 96th transatlantic crossing on May 28, 1914, when she left Quebec City bound for Liverpool with nearly 1,500 passengers and crew. As she set off that afternoon, members of the Salvation Army Band sang the hymnal, "God Be With You Till We Meet Again." Commanding the doomed liner was 39-year-old Henry George Kendall, who had just been promoted to captain that month. This would be his first time taking the Empress down the St. Lawrence River. Meanwhile, the Norwegian cargo ship the SS Storstad was on its way to Quebec, carrying nearly 11,000 tons of coal. The Storstad was being captained by Thomas Anderson, who had been in command of the ship since it entered service in 1911. On board the Empress that evening on May 28th, passengers enjoyed dinner between 6 and 7 p.m. and most were in bed by 10. Around 1:30 a.m., the Empress dropped off her river pilot as she approached the Gulf of St. Lawrence before entering the Atlantic. A river pilot is someone who helps the captain navigate the ship in rivers and other inland waterways before going into the ocean. Shortly after dropping off the river pilot, a lookout on the Empress spotted the Storstad about 6 miles east off the starboard side. This is where accounts of what happened next can vary slightly depending on who you ask. According to reports, Captain Kendall aboard the Empress decided to alter course slightly so that his ship and the Storstad could pass starboard to starboard. As the Empress pulled away from shore, a thick fog suddenly rolled in, concealing the ships from each other. At this point, all they had to go on was the sound of each other's whistles. Concerned by the fog, Captain Kendall wanted to take extra precaution when departing. He blew the Empress's whistle 3 times to indicate to the Storstad that his ship was reversing. The Storstad then blew 1 long whistle in response, indicating that they were approaching on the starboard side. Kendall then blew his whistle 2 more times to communicate that the Empress was at a standstill and waiting for the Storstad to pass. On board the Storstad, Captain Anderson had gone to bed for the night, leaving his 33-year-old chief officer in command. According to his testimony, the chief officer thought that the Empress was signaling that it was trying to pass the Storstad port to port. By the time the chief officer spotted the Empress, it was too late. He called for Captain Anderson, who arrived on the bridge less than a minute before impact. Aboard the Empress, Captain Kendall saw the cargo ship emerge from the fog. The Storstad was coming directly toward the Empress at about 10 knots. In a vain attempt to avoid a collision, or at least avoid a direct impact, Kendall ordered the Empress to turn to starboard so that the stern of the ship would swing out away from the oncoming Storstad. With so little time to react, a collision was unavoidable. The Storstad penetrated the Empress midship between its 2 funnels. The freighter tore some 20 feet or 6 meters into the ship and 25 feet or 8 meters below the waterline on the starboard side. When the Storstad reversed, it left a gaping hole some 14 feet wide or 4.2 meters. Despite the destruction, the impact was deceptively gentle, according to survivors. That's because, as one historian wrote, the Storstad's bow had gone between the liner's steel ribs as smoothly as an assassin's knife. Immediately, tens of thousands of gallons of dark river water poured into the Empress. Passengers below deck, who had been sleeping just moments before, quickly drowned. Those who didn't die quickly found themselves struggling in total darkness to traverse the flooding corridors as the ship lurched to starboard. Dr. James Grant, the ship's surgeon on the Empress, later recalled, "I knew nothing of what was occurring until I was rolled out of my berth by the listing of the boat. At once I knew that there was something wrong and I tried to turn on the lights, but the power was off. I could not find the door. I heard screams of terror and the sound of rushing water. I did not know what was wrong, nor was there anything to guide me as to the danger." He managed to pull himself through an open porthole, where he found himself standing on the port side of the ship with other passengers and crew. Watching the waves come up the side of the ship, he said, felt like he was walking down to the beach. Portholes that had been left open overnight also hastened the sinking, as some of them were only a few feet above the waterline to begin with. Within 5 or 6 minutes, electricity on the ship went out, and the ship listed so badly that none of the lifeboats on the port side could be launched. About 14 minutes after the collision, the Empress made her final plunge into the St. Lawrence River. Captain Kendall was thrown from the bridge as the ship keeled over onto its side, and when he resurfaced, the Empress was gone. The 465 survivors were taken aboard the Storstad and 2 other Canadian government ships, the Eureka and Lady Evelyn. Out of the 138 children who were on board, only 4 of them survived. One of them was 8-year-old Florence Lorraine Barber, who was traveling in 2nd class with her mother and sister. Florence was saved by a man named Robert Crellin, a family friend who had been accompanying the Barbers on their journey. It was later revealed that Crellin was to marry Florence's mother once they reached England, but sadly, both Florence's mother and sister died in the sinking. Crellin later commented on Florence's bravery to reporters, saying, "The child was pluckier than a stout man. She never even whimpered, and complaint was out of the question." Florence added, "I felt somehow that I had not let him down by disgracing myself and crying." In the end, 1,012 people died in the sinking of the Empress of Ireland. Many of them remained entombed in the hull of the ship, never having a chance to escape. Nearly 200 victims were later recovered by the Lady Grey and taken back to Quebec. As Canada mourned this national tragedy, officials went to work to determine who was at fault. The official inquiry into the sinking placed blame on the Storstad crew, specifically its chief officer, Alfred Toffins, who was at the helm. The chief officer's testimony was quite damning to the Storstad's defense, as it demonstrated a lack of experience and good judgment on Toffins' part. When Toffins was asked at the trial if he believed that the Storstad had the right-of-way, the chief officer answered yes. "What does that mean?" asked Mr. Aspinall, who was legal counsel for Canadian Pacific Railway. "It means that we were entitled to keep our course and our speed," replied the officer. Do you seriously mean to suggest that you were entitled to maintain your speed in the fog? Not full speed, said the officer, moderate speed. Was it right to blow 2 short blasts to signify that you had stopped your ship and then order your engines ahead? Was it not misleading? Asked Mr. Aspinall. There was no time for it to be misleading. And finally, when asked if calling for the captain sooner could have helped avoid the collision, the officer responded that he saw no reason for the captain to come, as he saw no danger of a collision. In the end, the court ruled against the owners of the Storstad, forcing them to pay 2 million Canadian dollars in damages to CPR. As for the Storstad, it was given to CPR as recompense for the damages and later sold for $175,000. As for news of the Empress, headlines of the disaster were soon replaced by the onset of World War I just 2 months later. In a strange twist of fate, the Storstad was sunk by a German U-boat during the war in 1917, killing 3 crew members. The Empress lies in about 130 feet or 40 meters of water, which is relatively shallow for a ship her size. In fact, 2 months after the sinking, it was reported that the wreck of the Empress was shifting, causing her mast to rest just 35 feet or 11 meters below the surface. Because of the hazard this posed to other ships, divers had to blast off the Empress's masts. On April 30th, 1998, the wreck of the Empress of Ireland was declared a historic site by the Quebec provincial government, making it the first underwater heritage site in Quebec. A plaque at the Marine Museum in Quebec shares the ship's lasting legacy and the role she played in creating new lives for the immigrants who sailed her. It reads in part, "Tens of thousands of immigrants arrived aboard the Empress of Ireland between 1906 and 1914. Today, their many descendants remain historically and emotionally connected to this symbol of the roots of their lives in Canada." Thank you for watching today's video. If you enjoy stories about ships and maritime history, please consider showing your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It helps get the word out to more ship geeks and enthusiasts.